chair tonight, and I'm calling this meeting to order, participating from my home in Ann Arbor. Welcome to the October 10th, 2023 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission. We'll conduct this meeting like in-person meetings. Commissioners, during roll call, please indicate your current location. Also, during the meeting, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. And finally, mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be, public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter the meeting ID number 956-8718-7876 on your phone. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website, on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. Land acknowledgement. Joe, would you mind please reading the land acknowledgement statement?
Yep. All right. Excuse me. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, and Bodewadmi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you, Joe. We'll now do the roll call. If there's any known or excused absences, and Joe, do you mind doing the roll call?
Yep. Let me just pull up the correct thing. Yeah, just noting I've heard from, as mentioned, Chair McKenna. Commissioner Peck is also unavailable, as are our council members Redina and Briggs, though they've heard some of what's being discussed today already at a separate session. Yeah, and then on to roll call. As stated, please state where you are calling in from today. Commissioner Berkowitz.
President from my home in Ann Arbor.
Councilmember Briggs is noted. Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Reporting in from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hans.
From my home in Ann Arbor.
Vice Chair Harp.
Present from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Levin.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Noted. Chair McKenna. Commissioner Mirsky.
Present from my home in Ann Arbor.
Again, as noted, Commissioner Overpeck and Councilmember Redina. Commissioner Sendra.
Present from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Smith.
Present in Ann Arbor.
And Commissioner Zittelman.
Here in Ann Arbor.
All right. That is the roster, and Chair, you have a quorum. Back to you.
Thank you, Joe. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as posted and a second?
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Mirsky. Is there a second by Commissioner Colvin Garcia? Seeing no, let's see. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you'd want to propose changes or discuss any of the agenda items. No, seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the agenda as posted or with, please raise your hand and say aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and say no. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. The agenda is approved. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as posted and a second?
I also move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. And I see See a motion to approve from Commissioner Mursky and a second from Commissioner Cullen Garcia. Commissioner, please raise your hands if you want to propose changes or discuss an issue. Seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the minutes as posted, raise your hand and say aye. All those opposed, please.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Okay, seeing no hands raised, the minutes are approved. Now we're going to move on to our opportunity for public input. This is an opportunity for people to speak up for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
All right. We have a couple. First up, caller ending in 998.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you. So my name is Zachariah Ferrum. I'm a resident in Ward 2. I've called it a couple times into the Energy Commission, and I just want to say I'm very excited to see the results of the feasibility study. I'm not sure if you saw the number of residents that came out to City Council when that for the special work session. It was very inspiring to me, especially seeing a very wide variety of residents, from people in middle school and high school to people who are retired who still really care about what happens in our community. And so as you look through the results of this feasibility study, the presentation tonight, I hope that you'll remember a few different things. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that there are many costs that could not be evaluated in this study, many externalities, so costs that are borne by people like you and me, as residents of the city. When we get our power knocked out as a result of DTE's disinvestment in our grid, there is a massive cost to that, especially if you're a resident who needs to power medical devices, who stores medicine, who loses large amounts of food. These are costs that aren't very difficult to determine. There have been some attempts, but just remember that as you look through this study, there's also other externalities like people, losing pets, and in some cases, tragically, people losing their lives. So I hope that you'll remember that there's many things outside of the scope of this study that are important to keep in mind. And so I, of course, fully support municipalization, and I hope that you will follow the recommendation in this feasibility study to support the funding of a phase 2 feasibility study. This is the next step in the process of municipalizing, at least exploring the option. And I think given the widespread support for this proposal, I think it's fully warranted. And I hope that the Energy Commission will step up like it did for this study, for the phase 1 study, and really be very clear about where you all stand. I hope that you will come out in support of this phase 2 study, especially since this is what the study before you is recommending, that we go forward with the phase 2 study. Municipalization is the only way to achieve true energy democracy for all of our residents, as you know, and it will be a massive investment in the future of our city.
30 seconds.
And in particular, in the future of our younger residents and the younger generation who lives here in Ann Arbor. So thank you so much for your consideration. I hope you will consider at a future meeting endorsing a phase 2 study, and I look forward to seeing the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. We have, excuse me, caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Mr. Lang and Vice Chair Harp. I'm Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I look forward to the Five Lakes presentation tonight. I've heard Mr. Jester speak twice, and I would like more clarity on the valuation question. The report says anything between 281 million and 1.15 billion, and we've heard that there's no way to know without going through the process. Okay, but we can certainly narrow it down, at least the probabilities. Why is this important? As Jonathan Cohn from Boulder told the commission 2 years ago, stranded costs and going concern get thrown around as these huge specters that will kill any municipalization effort. They scream out risk. But you have to look at these costs rationally. Here's my take. The physical assets themselves, by book value, OCLD, Nugent estimates at $130 million. To allow DTE something for going concern or lost revenue, it multiplies that by 1.5 to arrive at a fair market value of $195 million. That's how Potomac attorney Tim Lundgren explained it at last month's council meeting. The rest, up to almost $1 billion, is all stranded assets, which is leftover generation capacity once Ann Arbor leaves the system. DTE built some capacity for Ann Arbor's load, so if we leave, that generation is stranded, and FERC has a formula for compensating DTE. It gets the difference between the former retail price DTE was getting and the future wholesale price it has to settle for over 20 years. It's hard to project DTE's revenues over that span, hence the huge gap in valuations. But here's what the report doesn't mention. FERC requires the utility to take all steps to eliminate stranded costs. DTE has to prove that it has done everything possible to mitigate those costs and show that it can't sell any of that released capacity to other native load customers. And with DTE shutting down coal plants at Bell River in 2027 and Monroe in 2032, it will be looking to increase capacity, sadly probably gas. But in any case, the problem won't be surplus generation, but not enough. So I doubt it can convince FERC of any excess capacity at all, much less 20 years worth. So to me, that 1.15 billion number ignores the reality on the ground. I've also heard the idea that we may have to pay DTE for some intangible value of the franchise. There's nothing about this I see in the
30
report,
seconds.
and no precedent for such compensation in Michigan that I can find. So I'm not a lawyer, but I did read the report closely, and here's my breakdown. 130 million for the physical assets, 65 million for going concern, a few million for streetlights, and the rest, something between 78 and 950 million for stranded costs. Let's try to narrow down these numbers, but especially stranded costs, the biggie, and approach
It's
this
time.
rationally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is caller ending in 277.
Yes, hi, good evening. Thank you so much. My name is Anthony Reffi. I'm calling from 4th Ward, and I'm really just here today to express my my disappointment with DTE. My power has gone out this past year. I've had 2 multi-day outages within a 6-month time frame, and prior to moving to Ann Arbor, this is something I had never experienced in my entire life. I'm 32 years old. Since moving to Ann Arbor, I'm now acutely aware of my power and how unreliable it is, and am very nervous whenever there's even a mild storm as our lights flicker, and I have to be concerned whether we have to throw out hundreds of dollars worth of food from our refrigerator again. And the lack of response and sense of urgency seemingly from DTE is just completely unacceptable. And I've come to believe through paying more attention to these issues that municipalization is really the only option to improve the reliability of our grid. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller ending in 857.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you very much for the possibility to speak. My name is Niels Neumann. I'm a resident in the 5th Ward, also a PhD student in sociology at the University of Michigan. I'm really excited about the outcomes of the first study and the prospect of a second study on municipalization. And I think I would like to share 2 anecdotes from my own experience about public power as someone who was moved to Ann Arbor about a year ago from Germany and has done research on municipal public power in Germany. And the first one goes in the same direction as the person that spoke before me about the experience of power outages. Never in my life have I experienced power outages before I moved to Ann Arbor, and I thought such a thing was a thing of the past. But over the last year that I lived here, I experienced 3 power outages, and I'm now acutely aware that this is still with us. Why, though, has that not been the case where I lived before? Well, because where I lived before, we had public power. And as a community, we made decisions to put the lines underground well before I was born. And because the lines are underground, there's just less risk of disruption. Second anecdote is from the city where I did my undergrad in Germany, that has a large municipal energy company. This company not only provides reliable and cheap energy, it is also a generator of income and revenue to fund other public services. So the energy company in Cologne provides significant funding to expand public transport and swimming pools. I believe that we can do something similar in Ann Arbor. The short-term investments will be considerable, but I do think that they will eventually pay off. And the study shows that the short-term investments are not that high, and that I think it is well justified to take back control over our energy and invest into the future of our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller ending in 661.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay. I'd like to thank the Energy Commission for the opportunity to speak. My name is Gus Teschke, and I live in Ward 5. I'd like to thank the Energy Commission for all its work on the Phase 1 feasibility study and its other service to Ann Arbor. And I'm really happy to see that the feasibility study shows that a municipal electric utility is feasible. That's good news. I and many other people in Ann Arbor believe the time has come to replace DTE with our own municipal electric utility, because it's the only way that we can get reliable electricity that's 100% from renewables for all residents. The next step is to determine a fair price for DTE's poles and wires, and that requires a Phase 2 feasibility study. So I support that Phase 2 feasibility study. I also support Ann Arbor Public Power because it supports a Phase 2 feasibility study. You can't say that too often, I think. And, we need to stop the power failures, or we need to stop burning coal and gas for our electricity. I urge the Energy Commission to support a Phase 2 feasibility study. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have caller ending in 228.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. My name is Greg Woodring. I'm the president of Ann Arbor for Public Power. I'd like to echo the previous caller, thanking for all of your hard work on the Energy Commission, those of you who went through the process with Ann Arbor for Public Power as we got the first authorized and funded. And I am excited by the results. There are a few things that I do want to just touch on From my reading of the report, I think that the earlier statements surrounding the evaluation are extremely insightful, and I would very much like to hear any comments from the contractors to confirm whether that breakdown is accurate or not.
You're breaking up on our end. Gonna give still not. Oh, you're coming back.
Hello. Oh,
hello.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, I'll be brief. The report does include the cost of building 10 new substations in its calculations. While it does not calculate the cost of reliability, building 10 new substations is very likely the vast majority of the cost to upgrade from a 4.8 kilovolt system to a 15.2 kilovolt system. That is one of the major things that we would need to do to increase reliability. And so that's something to keep in mind. I hope that you find a phase 2 feasibility study. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I have no further callers at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Then we will move on to our first or our only presentation this evening. And this is a presentation of the Energy Options Analysis Report.
Right. Well, thank you, Chair Harp, and thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Missy Stoltz. I'm the Director of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. And while tonight's report is from the contractors, I just want to give a little preface, and then I'll kick it over to the team to speak. So I want to reiterate that what you're going to hear tonight is the report from our consulting team, which is led by Five Lakes Energy, New Gen Strategies and Solutions, Sunstone Energy, and you'll see Store Energy, and you'll see some other partners on that list. This is not, however, staff's recommendation. You are hearing about a report from a consultant. Staff are still in the process of diving deep into this. In fact, today we just got to see one of the models for the very first time that's behind this. And there are many models behind this work. It's very robust. There's a lot of nuance. So it's going to take us a while to process all of this information. So again, let's just keep in mind, as you hear tonight, you're going to hear the work from the consultant's vantage, their recommendations. These are not staff's recommendations yet. We still have a lot of work to do on our end. Now, I'm going to share my screen here with you all and kick us off. We actually had two consulting teams that worked with us on this project. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the technical options analysis, which is critical. And I think that's where a lot of people's interest lies. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you I'm a social scientist, and I'm really curious about what the public also thinks broadly. So just thumbs up if you can see this screen with the 100% renewable energy option slide. Great. So what I'm going to do is share with you the results from a public survey that was done, and we had a third party do that survey, and I'll walk through that. But I think these are really kind of interesting pairs to go with the technical report. So I'll do that on their behalf. They're now off contract, and then we'll turn it over to the technical team to talk, and Douglas Jester will lead that. And then they're going to share some preliminary thoughts, and we'll open it up for Q&A. Happy to facilitate that Q&A, but again, I will just name, please, it's probably more useful to direct your questions to the consultants, which I'll help point them to because staff are not prepared to make any formal statements. Okay, so I mentioned we did two studies. We did a public survey that I'll talk about in a moment to really understand what the public was looking for in their energy system. And if you see me look to the side, it's because that's just the screen that everything is popping on. We also did the technical study, and here, which I know a lot of you have spent some time with, we hired the team led by Five Lakes Energy to create an energy options analysis that provides details about various pathways we could explore to hit our clean energy goals, right? That was the objective. The objective that Council has adopted is powering the entire community with 100% renewable electricity by 2030. That is NA20, right? Carbon neutrality by 2030 is the goal. And so we were evaluating pathways to achieve that goal. We also asked them to do what's kind of colloquially known as a phase 1 feasibility study into municipalization and a phase 2 rate analysis for a potential sustainable energy utility. That's what you'll see in the report findings. In doing these analyses, we wanted to make sure that any recommendations that came forward, or as they're evaluating different energy procurement options, right, things you can buy on the market versus utility structures, we wanted to understand how those things rank against the values that we have, whether that is achieving carbon neutrality by 2030, whether that is sustainability, equity, and transformation, the 3 values that ground A20, whether that's the energy criteria and principles that this commission helped adopt and City Council now has embraced, or whether that's our goal of a just transition for workers in the fossil fuel industry. We wanted to understand how these different criteria, both the energy options, and this, I'm going to use these words and they may not make sense. Hopefully by the end of the presentation, they do. The different options, procurement options we have, as well as the different utility structures in which those procurement options layer. So we wanted to be able to evaluate things more consistently across the goals that we have as a city. So I'm going to attempt to do justice to this, and I do apologize. I did not do the survey, so I'm going to walk through, oh goodness, bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to walk through the consultant's finding on the surveys when I pull up the right slides to do that. So while I do that behind the scenes, just to give you a sense, we did a competitive bid for a firm to do a public survey, which went into the field at the end of August. And the idea was to understand what the public was really interested in broadly as it relates to our energy systems. American Pulse was hired as the firm to conduct that survey. And let's pull these up here. Apologies. Oh, goodness. So what we wanted to do, while I pull this up, we wanted to run a statistically valid survey that was representative of the full public. And that was important, right? Because we didn't want to have a survey that was by choice, those who wanted to participate. We knew we would miss people. So it was critical that they did a statistically valid and representative sample of folks. And they did. So the survey was in the field from the 28th of August and through the 5th of September. This is a little bit about American Pulse if you'd like to look them up. And just transparently, all of this material is on our website. So we can share that with everyone. The slides, the actual survey instrument, the results, the tabulated results, every response. If you really want to dive into this, it is all there. So if I misspeak or don't know an answer, please direct yourself there. So the sample size was 412. We had a confidence interval and a margin of error was 95%. The confidence interval was plus or minus 4.8%. It was a multimodal survey, which means we did both, there were both phone, there were text responses, and then there was an online panel. And so that's how we curated responses. Here at the city, I asked them to make sure to ensure, as we talked about, that it was a representative sample, but also I wanted to see responses as a representative sample, and then I wanted to weight towards low income and communities of color to see if there was any variation across the board. They did not actually have to do weighting because the sample turned out to be representative. I just asked, and you'll see this in the tabulation, I asked them to pull out certain variables because I wanted to hone in on low income households and understand impact, and I wanted to understand communities of color who we tend not to hear from as much in this work. And so those are going to be elevated in a tabulation, but they are not overweighted, or they're not weighted in any way that's not representative of them in the community. Okay, so big picture, once they analyzed the survey, actually, before I go into that, one of the things that was really important in designing the survey instrument was making sure that we asked questions in different ways. And so when I talk about these responses, I'm going to talk about one of them that landed pretty clear for me was a question that was asked multiple different ways with different ways of responding. And so some of the fact that the results continually emphasize 3 things is really, really important. So in doing the survey, we wanted to understand, number one, their perspective on the 2030 goal, A20, and the 100% renewable electricity. We wanted to give people a chance to speak in their own words. We wanted to give people, well, we wanted to force people to rank options. And we also gave open kind of responses where they could say, we want the world. We want every single thing you could possibly offer. So by asking questions in those 3 different ways, it meant we could see and we could start honing in on what people like and what they absolutely have to have, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to elucidate that further. So one of the kind of first takeaways for me and for the consultants is, generally speaking, residents are supportive of our 2030 goals. And in the gray boxes, these are direct quotes from residents that they pulled out when they analyzed this. So you can just see it a little bit here. What this particular retired Caucasian female over 70 with a high school diploma and is supportive of the 2030 goal said is, we don't want to lose energy, and I don't want to pay property taxes, or I don't want my property taxes to pay for that. So let's look at what we got. This, again, these are the consultants. I know it's odd because I'm saying these words, but this is the consultants' finding. Their first insight is that resilience, reliability, and cost are paramount importance. Now, I'm using the terms resilience and reliability, but they are defined in this question. So we don't ask someone in the survey, do you care if your system is resilient? Do you care if it's reliable? We use the industry definitions of those terms so that way they can be differentiated. That's important. And I'll just colloquially say resilience is about, again, you can look at the survey for the actual wording. It's about ensuring you have some power when a disaster strikes. So it is not 100% power. It's basically your critical load. Reliability is not losing power on sunny days. So it may not feel like an important distinction, but it is a critically important distinction when you think about how to achieve it. Right? One can happen with perhaps better poles, better wires. Another really is happening fundamentally with battery storage. And so those are very different approaches, which is why we wanted to understand that. And across the board, no matter how we ask the question, these are the three most important things. And resilience is always number one. People want to have critical power when a disaster strikes. So you can see the ranking across the board. 66% of respondents indicated resilience, 48.6% and 48% are reliability and cost. And with the margin of error, those are statistically equal throughout the survey. Now, because I wanted to look at this kind of at a different level, you can see how this breaks down slightly. Now, resilience across every demographic group is the number one asset people want in their energy system. And being able to withstand a storm is the number one verbatim response that we saw in the open-ended questions. Reliability is number two. There are some differences here. Reliability and cost do flip in certain demographic circles, and I'll show that in a second. But across, like broadly speaking, this is sort of how things continually rank throughout the survey. The second insight that, again, they identified, but I will say it made my heart very happy, is a robust 75% of the respondents are aware of our goal to reach 100% renewable energy. And y'all know the city is not the best communicator, so this makes my heart slightly happy. And that many of them, the majority of them, are in support of that goal. In fact, some people said as fast as possible in their verbatim responses, including no later than 2030. So people are broadly aware of the goal, and that's important for the survey to understand. Are we actually picking people up on this goal, or is this goal sort of out of step with where the public wants us to go? The third strategic insight really dives into the support that we have for the goal. Here we have about 60% of residents saying they want renewable energy by 2030 or earlier in the survey. And 62.6% indicate that achieving that goal is important or very important to them in their energy system broadly. You can see a quote down below. As soon as possible, 2030 feels aggressively achievable, which I will be stealing from this Caucasian male. The fourth strategic insight is we asked a question where individuals could rank from 1 to 5 what they wanted in their energy system, and everything could be a 5 or everything could be a 1, right? They didn't force rank. And when you ask a question like that, what we found in the survey is that people want everything. They want all the things in their energy system. They want it to be cheap, resilient, reliable, across the board, right? But when you ask them, when you take that and then you force rank through, and even when you ask this question about how important is it to you that your system be that, we continue to see this thematic tie to resilience, reliability, and cost. So 86% of respondents said it was important to them to have a resilient system, with 63.9% saying it was the most important thing to them. Right. So this continuation, I know, probably feels redundant, but it's actually really important to have that kind of redundancy in a survey where you're asking questions in multiple different ways. The fifth strategic insight is ignore costs at our own peril. And that is, while cost may be towards the bottom of the top 3, it does bump, and this is what I was saying earlier on, based on different demographics. So those making $75,000 or less, it is the number 2 variable. And you'll notice that's statistically separate from reliability and cost, right? It's pulling away with that margin of error. The same is true for the non-white population. And then we have it jump, but it's within that margin of error for those under 40. So this was important. And they found what they shared with me is when they were going through the first ranked, cost was there, but sort of stayed in the third. As soon as you got into open-ended questions, people started to talk a lot about cost, and they talked about it in different ways. Sometimes it was about them personally not seeing their bills go up. Other times it was about their neighbors, those they cared about not seeing their bills go up. So it wasn't always a direct correlation, but costs kept popping up in the open-ended and during the coding. So you can see some of the information here. And if you do want to go look at the survey instrument itself, they do identify which questions are coded in this process. They also gave us some of residents' own words here, and I know you have the slide deck, so I won't belabor this, but this is, again, verbatim, anything a resident sort of said that they pulled out of the survey around these areas. So here's their bottom line finding. What they found is that residents are generally supportive of the city's 2030 renewable energy goal, and they place a high priority on resilience, reliability, and cost. Tailoring communication to different demographic groups, especially those prioritizing cost, is going to be crucial in continuing to build engagement and support for our renewable energy initiatives. And their recommendation is that we focus on strategies that improve resilience, reliability, and cost, given the clear tie to the public. And then they have a nice thank you. So with that, I'm going to stop here. And Douglas, I'm going to switch back to your slides and then re-bring them up. So give me just a second. Again, I am not probably the best position to ask technical questions about the survey, but when we get there, I can try. John, you want to throw me a softball? I'll do my best.
Real quickly, was there anything that was a surprise or unexpected?
Yeah, I would say I did not expect resilience to pop as high. I thought reliability far and away would be, given the topic day at the hand. And then this is slightly selfish, but I was very surprised to see the public awareness of our goals. I definitely did not expect to see that. I was a little afraid of that question, if we're really honest, to see that the public wasn't in support, but that did not prove to be true. Excuse me. Good question. Okay. Douglas, I'm going to hand this over to you. So we've got on the line, I'm going to just really quickly promote Joe and Rick in case they want to come in. Douglas Jester is our lead for the technical report. So Douglas, let me kick this to you now. Go for it.
Okay. And can I control the slides, or will you advance them?
Ooh, do you have them on your end? Because if so, I'll make you.
Not immediately.
I got you. I will advance them for you. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to be sure that we were coordinating. Okay. Well, thank you all. I am, as previously announced, Douglas Jester, managing partner of Five Lakes Energy. We were lead on this effort. I haven't said this in the other presentations, but I think given the public comment and the interest that some of you have, it's helpful that I also say that I just finished my second term of 4 years each as a commissioner of the Lansing Board of Water and Light, which is the largest municipal utility in the state. And I and the rest of the Five Lakes team routinely appear in Public Service Commission cases regarding DTE. So we're, very familiar with regulated utilities. And I just think it's helpful for you to know that as a point of background. In this project, we were joined by SunStor Energy. Joe Kopp did a lot of the work on the potential for solar within the city limits and helped with other aspects of the project. Nugent Strategies and Solutions did the bulk of the work on the municipalization analysis. We were all advised by Potomac Law Group. They are one of the leading firms in the state practicing administrative law on particularly utility regulation, but importantly, they also have a team in Washington, D.C. that operates before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So they brought expertise from both state and federal levels to the discussion. And several of my colleagues at Five Lakes Energy also worked on this. Rick Bunch is with us tonight. And Scott, I should have mentioned Scott Burnham from NewGen is with us. So I'm going to run through the presentation, but when we get to questions, I may throw things their way. Yeah, let's advance. So in order to establish context for our analysis, we began with a profile of Ann Arbor's energy use. And the graph here is a single projection of electricity requirements for Ann Arbor. This is, and it's divided between residential and commercial uses. This excludes the University of Michigan. And we'll talk more about that later, but basically they have their own distribution system already and have their own sustainability plan and so on. So it just made sense to not include them in this picture. The current annual usage of electricity is about billion kilowatt hours. And I think you probably all know this, but kilowatt hours are what you're typically billed on at prices in the range of 17, 18 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on which rate schedule you're in and whether you're commercial or residential. This forecast is based on the 820 intent for what the city will be doing in the way of efficiency and electrification. Of course, it may be different. The real world may turn out differently than this. And there is plenty of adaptability in the approaches we recommend. But this, I think, helps to frame up the tasks that are in front of us. What you see is that load doesn't change very much until around the period between 2030 and 2035. That is due to countervailing effects of increasing electricity efficiency and the beginnings of electrification. Post 2030, electrification really begins to take off, and that is both transportation electrification and buildings and to a limited extent industrial electrification. The dynamics of those are really just driven by both the city's plans under 820, but also by what's going on in the market for vehicles and things like that. We didn't include a graph of it here, but as part of our analysis, we looked at patterns hourly over the course of the year in these same years. And right now, Ann Arbor's annual peak loads occur typically on hot summer afternoons when air conditioning load is high, and that creates the peak conditions. In a future with a lot of building electrification, the peak load moves to winter, and typically on a cold January night. So that has significant implications for the degree to which solar within the community helps and things like that. And we account for that in our analyses. Let's go to the next slide. So part of our charge was to develop options for how the community could get to 100% renewables by 2030. The two pie charts here show basically where we are in 2023 and at least one reasonable scenario of where we would be in 2030. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. So 15% blue-green slice in 2023 is DTE's share of renewables in their general power supply. They have voluntary green pricing, and that's separate. That's shown in the sort of red colored slice. And that is people in the city voluntarily participating in high renewables, typically 100% renewables for their power supply through an offering by DTE. Ann Arbor has a couple of dams, as you no doubt know. Those are under contract to DTE. The energy is sold to DTE and capacity, but the renewable energy credits are retained by the city, and so that's part of the portfolio here, not embedded in DTE's 15% renewables. And then Ann Arbor Public Schools have made a commitment, which shows up on the 2030 graph as almost white, but it is not yet present in 2023. And finally, there are certainly people within the community who have behind the meter PV or PV plus storage, and that is shown in the sort of dark gray slice here. So as of today, Ann Arbor is about 19% renewables and with an 81% gap. In the 2030 forecast that we're showing here, we assume no new initiatives. It's DTE following through on their integrated resource plan, which gets them to about 35% renewables in 2030. People continuing to voluntarily do behind the meter solar, either on their own or through the solarization program. And that is accelerating because the economics are increasingly favorable over this period. And then it is now the case that the voluntary green pricing program, noted here as the MIGP program at DTE, is a net savings to the participants. That may not persist, but it'll be close, and we have seen an increase in uptake as that has ceased to be a premium price to get renewables. And then the Ann Arbor Public School commitment comes in. Take all of those together, and you get gap of about 41% of the city's electricity supply in 2030. This is not something that just happens. It requires both DTE and the city following through on the existing programs and executing them well and vigorously. So it could be worse than this. Absent new directions, though, it's probably not going to be much better than this. So the gap that needs to be filled is at least on the order of 41% of current electricity sales, since we're projecting that those won't significantly increase by 2030. Next slide. Missy was careful to try to distinguish energy options from utility structure alternatives, and I want to stress that as well. We looked at quite a number of energy options. Mostly were variants on the kinds of ideas that we're going to talk about here, but that we ruled out as either unacceptable or impractical for various reasons. And we did our analysis around the list that's shown on the slide. Because you're Energy Commission and not City Council or other audiences, I won't go into as much depth on these as I have been, but I do want to make sure that their definitions are reasonably clear. So behind the meter, means on the customer side of the meter, it's typically rooftop solar, perhaps has storage with it. Community solar, I want to elaborate a little on a couple of points. One is that Michigan's utilities offer programs that they label as community solar. And by that, they mean that they own the facilities and they offer a subscription to their customers. It's really part of the voluntary green pricing program, but it's without ownership by either third party or by community members. We're meaning here what is commonly referred to as true community solar, where the ownership is not by the utility, but rather the power from the community solar facility is delivered to the utility and thereby implicitly to the subscribers, but the business relationship between the subscribers and the community solar project is either ownership by the subscribers or payment to a third party. And that third party might be a nonprofit or a for-profit entity. We're not prescribing. The second point I want to make is that as we sit, true community solar is not a legally viable option in Michigan. There is legislation that could change that, and so we included it in the analysis, but it is not something that you can go out and do today. The closest you can get is various arrangements through the voluntary green pricing programs. Power purchase agreements. This requires a little bit of care in order for people to think clearly about it. In the United States, and particularly in our region and others where there are so-called regional transmission organizations, anybody generating from a utility scale facility, whether it be renewable or not, is obligated to sell the power from that facility into a wholesale market. And then all of the load serving entities, as they're referred to, which would include DTE or any future municipal utility that Ann Arbor might create, must purchase all of the power they sell to their retail customers from that wholesale market. So both physically and by economic transaction. You don't enter into a power purchase agreement for a remote facility and get power direct from that facility to you. It is rather that you, in some fashion, claim ownership of the power and have it and pay whatever price that is or own the facility, and then you get the wholesale price of the power when you sell it into the grid. And then if you have customers, retail customers, they're served, again, you buy that power from the wholesale market. There may be subtle differences between the price at which you sell and the price at which you buy based on congestion in the transmission system or differences in timing. But the idea is that you basically balance out as a power provider. In the scenarios where Ann Arbor creates a municipal utility, a traditional power purchase agreement of the kind that I just described makes sense. Where you are essentially trying to cover the gap while still being served by DTE, the point of entering into a power purchase agreement would be to acquire renewable energy credits so that you're claiming the renewableness of that power for Ann Arbor's purposes. If you do that through a traditional power purchase agreement, you are taking on all of the price risk for the difference between what it costs to purchase that power from the facility or own the facility and whatever the wholesale price of power is moment to moment. That could go to your benefit. It also could be very costly. That's a risk that you wouldn't be able to pass on to customers like a utility could, And so it would be high risk to the city, and we'd recommend not doing that. But you can enter a so-called virtual power purchase agreement where effectively you are buying the renewable energy credits from one or more specific facilities with whatever attributes they have, and you would know. The owner of that facility still sells the power and capacity into the wholesale market and takes whatever risk is attached to that. You're just paying what that seller expects to be the difference between their cost for producing that renewable power and what they can get in the market for the power and capacity. So that was a long bit, but it's very important understanding all of the rest of this. There is a national market in renewable energy credits, and you can specify renewable energy credits in that market as to vintage, general geography, and general technology, but is generally not renewable energy credits from specific facilities. So the difference between getting renewable energy credits from a virtual power purchase agreement and the national renewable energy credits market is that when you do a virtual power purchase agreement, you know the facility or facilities that it's from, and you can overlay it with the city's values. You can say, well, we want it to be from Michigan. We want it to be new. We want it to, be solar or wind or a certain mixture, and so on. In effect, you can prescribe the nature of that generation facility in your purchase, where with the National Renewable Energy Credit Market, you can't. We'll talk more about it later, but the national market is available as essentially as a spot market, so it can be bought for short periods of time and on a fairly short lead time to the period when you want the renewable energy credits. Where investing in a power purchase agreement, it probably has to be physically built, and you have multiple years of development to get where you actually receive those renewable energy credits. We evaluated something called a virtual power reduction agreement. I suspect many of you have heard of this, but it's essentially an arrangement whereby Ann Arbor could invest in someone elsewhere, either gaining some energy efficiency or having rooftop solar, and essentially take credit for that toward your ambitions while it actually happens somewhere else. And then finally, you can participate, Ann Arbor customers of DTE can participate in DTE's My Green Power program. Has different terms for a little bit for residential and commercial customers, but it basically is that you get DTE to produce enough renewables to meet your load. You pay the difference between the cost of that from their specific facilities and the cost of them supplying you power otherwise. That difference historically was positive and perhaps even a bit large. Now it's quite close to a net zero. Last year was slightly to your benefit to be a participant. There are variations within that, such as the anchor tenant program that Ann Arbor pioneered in one of the recent cases that would let the city be an anchor tenant and then essentially sell off its share of the output from a specific facility to other community members and things like that. But those programs are the energy options that we evaluated. In general, I want to push on, but if there are any questions about the sort of definitions of these, I'd be happy to deal with that now. Okay, let's go on. I am not going to go through the eye chart on the right in detail, but we undertook to score each of the energy options on each of Ann Arbor's criteria and principles. Because we were only considering options that provide 100% renewables and assumed that those would be new, essentially all options get full credit for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by displacing fossil fuel generation in the regional generation scheduling process, and for additionality. When we get to the other criteria, it gets more complicated, and I'll summarize it for now by saying that on-site renewables, community solar score better on things like starting local and providing resilience, and utility scale programs that already exist or purchase of renewable energy credits from the national market score better on scalability and speed. And that's just kind of the fundamental trade-off. There are important nuanced differences, which we address in the report amongst the various options on some of the criteria, but that is the general picture. Next slide. There are a lot of different ways that you need to look at costs. You can look at sort of total cost to society. There are city budget implications of the various options, and cost to DTE as well. Those are all addressed in the report. The graph I have here is another perspective, which is essentially the cost to the person or party making the decision to pursue any one of these options. So, national renewable energy credits, that would be the city going out and buying them. So that would be a cost to the city. Behind the meter PV, is rooftop solar. Whoever owns and occupies that property is paying for the rooftop solar and avoiding the purchase of certain power, from DTE or from the municipal utility in that scenario. And this is their cost for making that decision. So this is an important perspective, just because the people making the decisions will be thinking about these costs. The two colors, 2023 is our assessment now. 2030 is a forecast of what it will be in 2030, and shows you the kind of the trends in cost. Some of these options are not available or don't make sense if you create a municipal utility like MyGreenPower, and others are easier to do if you have a municipal utility, or can only be done if you have a municipal utility, at least under current law, community solar being an example of that. Next slide. There we go. So under various scenarios, and we'll talk about those a bit more later, we looked at what sort of portfolio could be put together to meet the 100% renewable standard by 2030 and beyond. In this case, what we're showing is 100% renewables by 2030 with a ramp up in each of the options. And that ramp up reflects that it takes time to build up any quantity of renewables. And so you wouldn't wait until 2030 to start. You'd have to be working from now on. The DTE grid piece at the bottom is their IRP path through 2030. We combined, for graphics purposes, the Ann Arbor Public Schools and the RECs from the dams on the Huron. the voluntary green pricing from DTE done individually by DTE customers within the community. Behind the meter solar or solar plus storage is the red slice, and then we assumed in this scenario that the sustainable energy utility option is pursued, produces a certain amount of solar uptake, and that's in a blue-gray band. And then the last piece of getting to renewables is a combination of virtual purchase power agreements and national market renewable energy credits. And those have some lead times, so you have to build it up. There are graphs like this for each of the various scenarios within the report, and encourage you to look there. It is feasible to get to 100% renewables in each of these scenarios. The extent to which you achieve renewables from other sources essentially determines how much you need to use renewable energy credits for. We refer to that as topping off, although it could be a large topping off or a small topping off of meeting your 100% renewable energy credits. Next slide. So here are 3 of those scenarios just to illustrate the nature of the results. The DTE plus is assuming everybody's continuing to get their service from DTE and there's no sustainable energy utility to supplement DTE. And then the plus is that Ann Arbor does some of these things in order to accrue enough renewable energy credits to cover the community. The second column with numbers is that DTE plus, but with a sustainable energy utility. And you can see that we estimate that by 2030, that brings you 8% of the power within the community through behind the meter solar. And then the last column adds community solar to that. If you could hypothetically go forward with that under revised law, or if DTE voluntarily agreed to it, and that brings about 6%. So the gap that needs to be covered with renewable energy credits from utility scale facilities, either by VPPA or national rec market purchases, in the leftmost column is 42%. That's a round off, essentially the same as the 41% gap in the early slide. With the SEU, you bring that down to 34%. And if you could also do community solar, you bring that down to 27%. So this just shows you how the different options interact to get you to the 100% portfolio. Of course, different details of the offers, different vigor in which they are pursued, different economic assumptions about the prices of things and so on would produce different outcomes, but the same basic strategy still applies. Next slide. Here we show city costs for those 3 options. This is a different accounting stance, but one that's important. The top band is 2030. The bottom band is 2023 to 2029 because you have to ramp up to it. So there would be costs in that interim. City costs are total. Recoverable costs are essentially where the city incurs a cost, but then turns around and collects it from customers, such as in the sustainable energy utility. And non-recoverable costs are things that come out of the city budget and then are not paid in by customers. They'd have to come from the climate millage or other parts of the city budget. And you can see that, that non-recoverable cost versus recoverable cost changes depending on the mix of sources that you use. So that's another aspect of this that the city will have to think through. Next slide. we looked at 3 utility structure options, and I want to say now, while defining these, but when we get to in a couple slides to the evaluation, we looked at the sustainable energy utility by itself, sort of scored that. And that's what you'll see a little later on. And the same with the municipal utility. But with the sustainable energy utility, you still have to get service from DTE to all customers. So the 3 options are continuing to get service from DTE and supplementing that with a renewable strategy, adding a sustainable energy utility to the mix, continuing to be served by DTE, or then doing a full-on municipal utility and subsuming the equivalent of the SCU inside of that. Excuse me. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the University of Michigan is excluded really from all of these. Next slide. We provide in the report some possible scenarios for the SEU, and we are providing to city staff a financial model in which a lot more options can be evaluated. There are lots and lots of ways to approach this, and we would have created a lot of content in the report without necessarily informing anybody of anything. So we leave that to the model. These example scenarios are to illustrate some of the important considerations. The leftmost column of labeled as 1,250 subscribers is in the deployment years 2024 to 2027. The assumption here is that it'll be PV only at a power purchase rate to the participating customers of 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is cost competitive with private solar leases. And we did conclude that you can succeed in operating a sustainable energy utility in competition with those private solar leases or solar PPAs without long-term subsidy. The financing in this particular scenario is 100% debt. That could be general obligation bonds or revenue bonds, but it's at essentially city debt rates. In the second column, we're imagining a later period, 2027 to 2030. And there's been some indexing of the rates, essentially inflation. And there are multiple tranches of subscribers coming in with different costs of installation. Cost of installation of rooftop solar goes down over time. And so we have a blend of costs. And again, this is debt financed. And then in the third example, we use 12,500 subscribers. That number pushes what we thought would be the debt capacity of the city for an SEU, at least for a while. And so we evaluated the option of the city contracting with a third party who would actually own the rooftop solar systems provided by the SEU, and a significant portion of the revenue to the SEU would be passed through to that third party owner to pay off that investment. And that third party owner would have some risk involved, and so would want equity as well as some debt, and so would have a higher cost of financing. So those are examples of the kinds of things that are possible within the model. Toward the bottom, you'll see there's a PV only starting PPA rate in each of those scenarios. And then the next line is PVS, PV plus storage. And these are the rates if you had people pay for the storage through the kilowatt hour rates. And as you can see, those are kind of high. There's a little bit of value having storage in being able to either keep your solar production on site and not sell it to DTE at a low rate, or being able to do arbitrage between pricing periods under a time of use rate. But that is not very much value to someone who has storage. In dollar terms, it's not. So the principal value of storage in residential applications now is resilience value, being able to operate your home when the power is out. And the common approach to pricing that is a fixed monthly charge. In previous presentations, some of you might have heard me say $82. We did find an error in our transcription of numbers into this. It's actually $67 a month. That would be the fee for somebody to have a representative battery. And in that case, they would only pay the PV only line on a kilowatt hour basis. So you have rate design options as well as options for how the SEU itself operates. The debt requirements in thousands, that SEU debt obligations line kind of in the middle, gives you a flavor. It would, for the 12,500 subscribers, the city would need to finance $233 million, which would be made back over time, but it's still a substantial debt facility that would be required. So again, that's something that has to be managed in all of the options here. Next slide. I'm going to turn now to the analysis of the municipal utility. This analysis, there's some interaction between Five Lakes about background assumptions in NewGen, but this is largely NewGen's work. I want to be sure and give some definition to the numbers that you have in front of you. First of all, there are columns for low end and high end. That does not mean that those are absolute brackets. There's a little bit of possibility of going lower or higher. These represent primarily different possibilities about what courts or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission might say that Ann Arbor has to pay DTE in order to take over the electric service to customers in Ann Arbor. The dollars here are 2024 dollars, assuming this could just be done overnight. Reality is that it would take time, and during that time, some of the assets that are within the city would be retired and new ones would be added, and so the values would change. DTE may undertake improvements in the distribution system that would change the values. And of course, there's general inflation, changes in rates from DTE and things like that. So this is to help you think about the options, not a set of numbers that you can say in 2032 when an MEU comes into being that this is what the numbers will be. It's not intended to be that at all. This does not include the costs, the legal costs of getting to having an MEU, getting through the legal process of taking it over. And does not include costs of substantially improving reliability. This is just getting control of the utility assets within the city, setting up your own municipal utility, and then being able to go forward from there. There are, this was based on sampling of the distribution system and that was essentially visual. It's not based on having access to DTE records on what things originally cost, their condition, and those kinds of things. You would only get that kind of information from DTE, at least likely, through a legal process where you have discovery rights. So there is certainly uncertainty in the estimates made because of the source of the data. And finally, the key uncertainties are because there's really no precedent in Michigan and very few precedents across the country for a municipalization. Most of the municipalizations that have occurred have been in cities that had some kind of franchise agreement that had a finite life and an end point. Michigan, unfortunately, has a perpetual franchise, and so you're in a different context than those other communities. And there's only one case in Alma, Michigan, where a perpetual franchise was a part of the picture. There is a FERC decision on that, which we took as some of our guidance, but that case was not completed. So there are big holes in the definitions of what FERC would do if presented with sort of a final decision on a takeover of utility assets in a city in Michigan. So most of the uncertainty here between the low end and high end is only resolved by, if you will, going to court and finding out what the rules are on the compensation to a DTE. This is intended to give you a sense of the range that might be encountered. And as you can see on the low end, this is where there was earlier reference in public comment to 1.5 times the original cost less depreciation of the assets, plus some stranded costs for generation, but minimized. And in that case, you could have rates that are immediately less than DTE's rates, but again, without improving reliability. Any decisions adverse to that methodology would fairly rapidly drive the costs up. And the high end is essentially where we assume that DTE's expected revenue has to be fully compensated over 20 years, expected net revenue, and that leads to a pretty large increase in rates. And this is in year one. Over time, you would buy down whatever you borrowed in order to acquire DTE's assets. And that's shown on the next slide, if we can go there, where we go 20 years out and we have largely extinguished the DTE payoff. And now it starts to look favorable. But again, this is, without reliability improvements. So any investments you would choose to make in reliability, would change this picture. We did assume that in launching a municipal utility, there would be an initial investment in some primary lines and substations. The main purpose of that is to make sure that we can separate service to customers within Ann Arbor from service to customers outside of Ann Arbor. You would not be able to take over service to somebody in a neighboring township. DTE would retain that, and if you're using shared infrastructure, life gets really complicated, and it probably wouldn't happen very well anyway. So we assumed that you'd have to do physical separation so that power is coming from the transmission grid, which is not owned by the DTE, rather by ITC, and then have a distribution grid within the city that does not serve non-city customers. So that's what that investment was about. There might be some modest reliability improvements come from that, but most of the outages you experience in the city are out in the distribution network itself, and that would not inherently be improved. So I just wanted to be really clear about, what you would have going in. Next slide. This graph is just to give you a picture of the information from those previous two, showing, kind of on the low end, if the asset acquisition is in the neighborhood of $250 million, you would have a rate a bit less than DTE's. The break even is, call it $380 million as the price of taking over from DTE and accomplishing the physical separation. And then anything more costly than that, your rates are higher than DTE's rates in 2024. And of course, all of these things change over time. So that's the scenario, essentially the set of challenges that you have in getting to a municipal utility. Next slide. We did evaluate the DTE service, SEU, and the MEU. I haven't talked much about it, but it is our assessment that there is not any feasible path to have functioning municipal utility with 100% renewables acquired by that utility by 2030. So we evaluated what the MEU would look like whenever it happens in the column on the right. The column on the left is DTE, and the middle one is the SEU by itself, not the blend of SEU and DTE. Again, you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and additionality because we're assuming we get to 100% renewables. The equity and justice line warrants a little discussion. There are multiple considerations under that heading, but one of them that turns out to be important in our assessment is cost. In addition to the question of what the rates would be for the MEU, which could be high and therefore poor, there is a legal problem in that there is a basis in Michigan law, a requirement actually, that investor-owned utilities regulated by the Public Service Commission provide low-income tariffs that provide a form of assistance to low-income households in paying their bills. In practice, for most Michigan utilities, that is currently an allowance of a certain number of dollars per month on the bill. DTE's is $40 for most low-income customers. So just a straight reduction of the bill by that amount. There are pilot projects which will be ending soon for what we call a percentage of income payment plan, which caps a household's utility bills at a certain percentage of their income. And generally, those of us working on these issues are targeting 6% as that cap. There is not presently any provision in Michigan law that allows a municipal utility to do that. And our belief is that the Volt decision would treat any cost shift, away from the cost of service for all customers as though it were a tax, requiring that it meet Headley Amendment and that it go through all of the approvals that come from that. So that likely means you would not in an MEU have the opportunity to offer discounted rates to low-income customers. So that's why you only get up to fair under that option. And then, the rest of the criteria, it's basically the same story as we told on the options. You can move faster by supplementing DTE. It's a slow process to get an MEU in place and meet your criteria there. One thing on speed that I should have mentioned earlier, and let me fill it in now. Rooftop solar or even community solar is a pretty fast construction. So in that sense, speed is very good. But to do it at scale, there are lots of people who have to make the decision and act on it. And so to build up quantities of renewables through those mechanisms will be slower. We wound up scoring on that basis that it's something like the SEU is only fair, considering that it can be fast for the individuals who participate, but slow overall in meeting your 100% renewables objective. The MEU could potentially do better on many of these criteria if it were not financially constrained. And that just depends on the outcome of how the MEU comes into being. So perhaps this is a more pessimistic view, but based on what we think is the likely outcome of an acquisition and how long it will take, we didn't score it very highly. But that, of course, is a contingent scoring. I just want to be upfront about that. Next slide. So we're finally, after all of that, down to our recommendations. So our recommendations generally are, over time, beginning in 2030, you fulfill your 100% renewable electricity requirements by topping off with national renewable energy credits. That brings a comparatively low cost for renewables and a lot of flexibility. You can buy RECs fairly quickly, so you don't have to plan far in advance. It's a spot market, and so quantities are very flexible, so you don't have to pre-commit to more than you might need. On the other hand, that is the lowest quality option that you have. So underneath that, you would want to grow your commitment to higher quality renewable sources. And we do recommend pursuing the sustainable energy utility to accelerate solar development and resilience within the city. In order to get some of those higher quality RECs, we recommend that you begin soon to competitively procure renewable energy credits through virtual PPAs. And DTE could bid into that under the terms of their VGP program. They could make that offer, or that can be your backstop. In doing that, you would want to think about your other values represented in the principles and how you might credit one source versus another because you want to consider price, but you also want to consider the quality of the renewable energy credit as against those principles. And you can build up those renewable energy credits as a portfolio over time. And then, as I said, use the national RECs to top off. There's a loss of quality in that, but it's a way of meeting the standard without trying to go faster than you really can or get quality where it's not available, which would be the challenge. I would note as well that to the extent that you're thinking that you want renewables, say in Michigan, I think everybody likely knows there's a bill package currently under consideration that would ramp up renewable energy standards in Michigan. And that, of course, would create significant additional demand in the market and make it harder for Ann Arbor to acquire, even as it means the DTE would be advancing faster than their current commitment. So your need might be reduced, but it could be a complicated thing to work through. So you'll just have to see where we all are in, I hope, a few weeks. And then the last point, I touched on this earlier, but for you to pursue municipalization and gain control of the assets, or gain the legal decision that you're going to take control of the assets, is likely several years. Then it would be a 2 or 3 year effort to stand up an MEU and really become operational, which puts us out past 2030. So you can't say, well, we're going to do the MEU and then go after our renewables if you're going to make 100% by 2030. You need to sort of decouple those. You can pursue 100% renewable energy in the meantime and do it with a bit of care to make sure you have the option to move those renewable energy resources over into the municipal utility if the city decided to go that way. But you need to, if you're going to make 100% by 2030, you need to pursue that independently, for the most part, of any consideration of a municipal utility. So those are principal recommendations. There's a lot more detail in the report. Next slide. So next steps, if you want to go down these paths, you need to pursue a request for proposals for renewable energy credits. If they're going to be high quality RECs from new facilities meeting some of your criteria, you would really need to issue an RFP in 2024, assuming that someone would contract to build something, which would then take them several years to get to commercial operation in order for you to receive renewable energy credits in, say, 2029 or 2030. We think you could begin procurement of national renewable energy credits for 2030 and later, beginning in about 2028, and expect that they would be available on the market. You should decide whether to pursue a sustainable energy utility, and if you do, there are important decisions to be made about the financial approach. You will need somebody managing that effort, and you would need to hire a utility manager, and there's some additional staffing required, as well as services from other city departments, which we describe in the report. And then there's a legal process that you'll have to go through to actually create the sustainable energy utility. All of that is a pretty significant undertaking and will take you a bit of time. And then finally, you have to decide whether to pursue municipalization. You'd need a phase 2 study to take away what uncertainty can be taken away without beginning the legal process. And you'd need to retain the law firm. And there's an interaction here. In a case like this, you'll need to present your offer of what you'll pay for the assets, which you'd need the phase 2 study for. But whoever's doing that will need to be working with your attorneys to essentially get ready for the case and then for them to serve as expert witnesses. So that's just the beginning of what will inevitably be a long road. And it may take a team of law firms, given that you have to do work before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as well as likely in state court. So those are where your next steps would go. I think that's everything that we wanted to say. I want to do a quick call out, particularly, well, to anyone, but particularly to Nugent, Scott Burnham, to see if there's anything more that ought to be said about the municipal utility path that I didn't cover.
Great. Thank you, Douglas. Appreciate that. As mentioned, my name is Scott Burnham. I'm a partner with NewGen Strategies and Solutions. We do a lot of financial economic activities with municipal entities across the country and have been involved with a number of municipalization studies. I think, Douglas, to your point, I think you presented our findings very well and the recommendations as well. You know, any phase 2 effort would really be targeted at reducing the uncertainty, as one of the callers mentioned earlier, that sort of wide range of potential income-based asset valuations. You know, how that happens and how you reduce that uncertainty would be would more likely be a legal strategy, right? And it would need to understand sort of what approaches the attorneys would recommend relative to going forward out and whether or not that would be going to the field to get more understanding of the assets. As was mentioned, you know, we did go out to the field. The team that worked with us, the engineering field, was out there for 3 days or so and doing a sampling. Whether or not the strategy would be to try and reduce uncertainty about better understanding the inventory, or whether or not the approach would be more towards saying, hey, let's go and file something in a district court so that we can start getting a better understanding of how how this FERC stranded cost obligation may apply. And so, you know, that would be sort of the recommendations. Again, is just to try and reduce that uncertainty. And it's less about sort of the cost basis, the asset cost basis, as it is the income cost basis, right? That's what's really driving that wide range in results. So that's what I would say.
Thanks. Back to you, Missy.
Chair Harp, I think we'll open it up for questions if you'd like to at this time. I would just offer one that we've heard a lot of that I think it's worth answering. And Scott, over to you. Right now, we only show a 20-year projection, but is it correct that you built the MEU model on a 20-year financing or a 30-year financing?
We're using 30-year financing. We were just showing 20 years of results because, you know, you get 30 years out, there's just so much uncertainty about really what assumptions you'd use. You know, 30 years ago, the energy industry was vastly different, right? So we capped it at a 20-year period, but used 30 years financing.
Welcome for questions.
Yeah, and I think we'll try and take just a couple of questions from each person, just to give everyone a chance to sort of go around and get a first round of questions. And so if you can prioritize your questions that way, we'll try to get through this. Please just raise your hand if you want to ask a few questions.
I didn't think this was a shy group.
Commissioner Colin Garcia.
I will break the ice with a request about I'd like to have a description of how you go about evaluating the assets. Do you just go out and count number of polls, poll 1, poll 2, poll 3? I'm sure you don't do that, and I would just like to know how you do that.
Again, if we're looking at ideally we'd have an inventory, right? How we get that inventory is a question. Sometimes you know there are in other jurisdictions you can go through and say, okay, we're going to go to the PUC or the equivalent PUC and file this and get that information. I don't think that's the case in Michigan. So it could very well be that you do a very intensive field investigation to get a better understanding what that inventory is in order to value it from a cost basis, right? From a replacement cost basis to reduce the uncertainty around the OCLD and RCNLD numbers that we have in our report. But again, that's not really what's driving the uncertainty in the feasibility analysis. That what's driving it is around the income value, and that has less to do with the physical assets and more about sort of the court interpretation of the stranded cost obligation.
If I can add to that just a little bit, in this instance, what Scott's team and the engineering firm that worked with them did was use essentially the map of Ann Arbor for sort of general information about the age of the part of the community and then the nature of the distribution system, and pick some random areas. And then they went and did field inspections looking to see what was there in certain areas, and visually estimating for example, things like the age. And Scott, you want to maybe elaborate just a little bit more?
Yeah,
on that?
absolutely. And that's a very good point because, you know, we basically have zero information from DTE. So we had to go to the field and say, okay, looking at the structure and the configuration of the distribution system. And our engineer said, well, you know, he's been in the business for a long time. And he said, well, I can look at that and say, that looks like 1980s vintage construction. So he said, okay, for this segment we're looking at, there's this amount of 1980s era investment. Same thing, you know, back to about the 60s and all the way through the 2000s. And so, and that's how we came up with the estimate of sort of the replacement cost and the original cost, right? Looking at those ages. And that's how we came up the depreciation as well. So we said, you know, if it was the 1960s, then it was probably 90% depreciated relative to, you know, the used upness of the asset. Of course, it's still there and still active, right? So, so in general, the system is highly depreciated, but again, we're making an assumption, we're making a calculation, I should say, around what we believe that depreciation is. DTE knows exactly what the depreciation is because that's how they generate revenue, right? You know, they get paid, you know, they get recovered depreciation. So that's part of their business model. How detailed they have way back for very old assets, you know, it's anybody's guess. But they definitely have a much better idea than we do. So does that help answer your question?
It's super interesting. Yes, very much so. I'm just thinking about, you know, older neighborhoods, newer neighborhoods, you know, new development sectors in the city have newer development, and there's the mixed, yeah. And then the areas that are having more outages and like associating that with the age of the infrastructure, it's like, yeah. And then how much money can still be made from utilizing that equipment, even if it's still, you know, if it's very old, all that, yeah. Thanks.
Other clarifications, questions, comments? Commissioner Zillman.
Yeah, I just have a couple clarifications for the alignment of organizational structures with the A20 energy criteria and principles. So just to make sure I'm getting it right, the equity and justice criterion is just measuring the ability to financially support lower income ratepayers, not really looking into the ability of a community to control their own grid and the quality of service provided.
Rick, you want to take that?
Sure, yeah, happy to. It's both. The definition of that principle, I think it is, mentions both access to the benefits of renewable energy services, which for us gets into the cost and the ease with which, you know, marginalized communities can get it. You know, so for example, it's pretty darn easy to sign up for DTE's program. But the other one is the ability to participate in decision-making about energy issues. So we just balance those two, you know, qualitatively as best we could.
Okay. And then Just real quick, the enhanced resilience for the MEU is poor. That's just because we'd be buying it from DTE without upgrading it there. Because like my thought would be that the community democratizes the grid and controls it while one of our core priorities, or at least the residents' priorities, is resilience and reliability, that they would make steps towards making that happen.
Yeah. Can I tackle that one too, Douglas? I expect you're right. And so Douglas alluded to this a little bit, but we had to assign grades essentially to the MEU based on the model that we ran. The MEU we ran uses entirely grid-based resources. I fully expect that if the MEU were to launch, it would do local distributed resources. It would, a lot of other things, but the truth is the model we ran was entirely on grid-based resources. Those don't add anything to resilience. So, maybe you can call it an asterisk. We can debate over whether that was the right way to do things, but we thought it was best to grade it on the model we actually ran.
Okay, just last thing, very quick. The start local then is also just fair for an MEU. What is that measuring?
Same thing. It's just we assume our model ran entirely grid-based resources. We assume that those resources would be distant and not local.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Smith, and then Commissioner Colin Garcia. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Great opportunity to learn more about the study. Understanding kind of the recommendation to move forward, or suggesting a phase 2 feasibility study would be needed to characterize all of the costs associated with municipalization, especially as it relates to reliability or resiliency there. Just wondering if you could kind of speak to the approach. I think we heard from a lot from the public in the personal burden that some of the recent outages have caused, and just curious how that may or may not be captured as part of that valuation process here.
Yeah. Excuse me. So we have been engaged on the regulatory side, pushing for greater reliability, from DTE. And as part of that, we have been using the available evidence on, what is an outage worth to somebody. That evidence was last summarized by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, one of the research teams there. And there's a calculator that's commonly used. It's really deficient for the purpose, especially as we experience it here in Ann Arbor. The evidence on which it's based is kind of old. It is mostly limited to data on outages of duration less than 8 hours, though the most recent version is some of it is up to 24 hours. And as you all know, all too well, we experience outages that are much longer than that. It also tends to be organized around outages that are fairly local, maybe individual customers or neighborhood or something like that. When the outages are widespread, it's much harder for people to take mitigative action, to reduce the harm that they experience by going across town and staying with a neighbor or whatever they might be able to do. So we think that the numbers that are out there are significantly understate the harm as we experience here in Michigan. That's all preliminary to saying that, just as an indicator, the average harm that a residential customer has from an outage in those numbers that are available is now on the order of $4 an hour. And, that adds up. If you have a 5-day outage or something like that. And we have been pushing through other engagements for the commission or even the legislature to really impose bill credit obligations on utilities based on those kinds of numbers. Was not within our scope to evaluate those, and I'm not trying to avoid the issue. Just, if you wanted to say, well, what would it be under these scenarios? It all depends on how much you think reliability would improve. And we definitely didn't have access to the kind of information that you would need to really re-engineer the distribution system in Ann Arbor and assert what level of improvement in reliability we would expect based on the choices that the community would make about how much to spend. So we absolutely acknowledge there are large values in improved reliability and resilience. Those will be offset by some considerable degree in the investments that will be necessary to achieve that improved reliability and resilience. But we don't have numbers on the balance of those two considerations. Anybody from the team want to add to that? I'm sorry, Missy, go ahead.
No, I think Scott should go because I was just going to clarify what I understood.
Yeah, I was just going to add, you asked sort of about what phase 2 would involve, and phase 2 is, obviously it depends on what the scope is requested. But generally speaking, when we think about phase 2, we're looking at reducing the uncertainty around those bounds in the municipal legislation study. We're not necessarily looking at reliability, resiliency, that could be done, right? But that's a different sort of path, and that's you'd have to really understand what's causing them, what's happening, why they're happening, where the failures are. Is it on the distribution system, or is it on the tree maintenance, or is it on the substations, or where along the whole spectrum of assets within the city is it occurring, and address it that way, and really come up with a specific plan around that. But generally speaking, I would say that's not part of what we would say is a phase 2 investigation.
I was just going to offer, having heard this 3 times and read the report 3 times, that I've sort of sat with this, and I'm going to offer this to the commission, and then I'm going to ask Douglas to push back and Scott to push back if this is not an interpretation. If I think about what the report has told us, especially around municipalization, which is where the questions are, very useful to understand what it could be to acquire a system and get marginal improvements in reliability by inherently adding marginal improvements. But it is not a study that looks at the cost to improve reliability or the cost to improve resilience. That is outside of what we've got in the numbers before us today. A second study traditionally would help us understand the asset valuation costs. Right. So the costs of those things that are outside, to what Commissioner Colvin Garcia named, those poles, those wires, those different pieces. But a lot of the cost is uncertain and only to be determined in court, because it's how the valuation method would be assessed by the courts. And so that second study might give us clarity, but clarity on honestly a smaller portion of what the uncertainty is. The large portion of uncertainty is only going to come in litigation. And to understand the cost of reliability, sure, we could put that in a phase 2, but traditionally it's not. That is a separate study to understand the additional costs that are not reflected in this report to build the system that our residents want. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
I think that's exactly very, very accurate, very well put.
Yeah. I do want to add one item of information that I did mention to council, but you should all hear it. Partly by my provocation, the Public Service Commission used a power that was in law from, I don't know, 1920s, and has undertaken an engineering and physical audit of DTE and consumers' distribution systems in order to understand, by having somebody independent look at it rather than just what we hear from DTE and consumers, why we have these outages and what options there are to do something about it. That study will not be geographically detailed, so it won't say here's what we found in Ann Arbor, but it will, I think, tell us all a lot about the conditions in DTE's grid And, your outage experiences are not that much worse than many other areas served by DTE. So we're probably looking at the same underlying causes and experiences. That study is supposed to be completed by, I think, May of next year. It is underway now. And I think even if you did decide to undertake a reliability improvement study, that it would be a much more efficient and on point study if it were informed by that audit that the commission has required to be done. So just thinking about timing, somewhere after that would probably be the most productive time to begin thinking seriously about what it would take to improve reliability.
That's very helpful. Mind if I have just a follow-on question to that? Very helpful, and I think I guess maybe this is directed to Missy. I'd just be very interested in understanding kind of, you mentioned being very early on in staff's process by which of reviewing this study, understandably so. Just curious if you could just add a little color into what that review process looks like, decision making, next steps as it relates to understanding kind of the pathway to 100% renewable energy, as well as kind of thinking about potentially that phase two study moving forward here.
Yeah, akin to some extent. So we've had the report for just a few days more than you all. And our staff are kind of working through it. And if you've read it, it is a lot to process and work through. And I've had the pleasure of working with the team. So like, they've kind of let me in by asking me key questions, but similarly, right, we're really diving into the nuance. So a lot of staff members have to sit with that, work on it. Today, I mentioned we just got one of the first models. Well, we just saw the first model. So we're going to have weeks, right, of handoffs of materials. And then we've got to dive in and look at things like interest rate and staffing models and just the variables, right, in those reports. So that's time that needs to come in. And then we will most certainly have OSI and public services have to reflect together and come to council with a recommendation based on what we've seen. I will say I see many pathways to 100% renewable energy, and I see one that is not by 2030. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mirsky?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the consultant team for spending their evening with us. I'm sure there's other options that you had, and we appreciate you spending time with us. And that also goes to Joe and Missy. I want to point out Missy is in her office. So Missy, thank you very much. We appreciate your and Joe's and the whole team's dedication and passion for all this. I have read the entire report, all 158 pages, and I spent about 10 hours doing that and commenting on it. I sent the comments to Missy and Joe this morning, said that I wouldn't comment tonight, allowing time for others, but there wasn't a long line for comments, so I thought that I would go ahead and do that, and Missy in her response encouraged me to do that. So I just want to share a couple of things. First of all, just generally, I want to encourage all the commissioners to review the report rather completely. You don't have to read every single page, but you have to think, if we're going to be advising council on policy, you really need to read this report. There's a ton of information in it, and what you will see is that this is extremely complex at any number of different levels, technical as well as financial, etc. And in order for us to do our job, I really think we have that obligation. This is sort of a unique situation, and so I would encourage you to do that. I would add to that I understand making decisions based on values is important, but I would ask that when we do that, and anybody listening in tonight or involved in this process, including stakeholders weighing in, is that I think we have an obligation to make recommendations and advise our council members as residents included by values that are informed by an objective understanding of the real facts in the situation. So just by saying, you know, this is something that I think we should do because it's a good thing for Ann Arbor, I don't think that cuts it. That's my opinion. You can do whatever you want, but that's what I would advise all of you to do. So I want to concentrate on a couple things. I'll just be brief, and I don't expect answers tonight because this is going already in my comments to the consultant team. I see two risks. The first is no growth. There is a statement in the report that says that the 820 plan assumes no growth. That's not correct. The 820 plan does assume growth. This is by memory. I think it's action 2.3, but there is an action in there that says that Ann Arbor will grow 261 units, I think it is, a year. In reality, Ann Arbor is growing much faster than that. Ann Arbor, as Ken Garber has documented, has already approved over 3,000 new housing and hotel units. Most of those are moving forward. And in my view, this is important because most of that is high density. Most of it, the vast majority of it, is mixed fuel, meaning natural gas is being used for heating, for hot water heating, and for air heating. And because it's high density, a lot of it is in downtown area or in areas where there's not going to be an opportunity to put a lot of solar. And because it's new construction, it's unlikely that those are going to be switched over to, for example, heat pumps or something like that, or that a ton of solar is going to go on the roof. That's just not going to happen in the first couple of years of these large developments that are being done by private developers. So I think that's important because that means we have to buy more risks or more RECs, and those RECs are expensive. The second risk that I think has to be evaluated is that we are going to meet all of the 820 goals. I completely understand that you had to make an assumption. That's a good assumption to start with, but any good evaluation also looks at risks. And in my view, there is a big risk that we will not meet all of the assumptions, indicators of success, and the timelines that are in the plan. And Missy knows that I documented a number of areas where we're behind currently. I met with her and with Councilmember Briggs and Radina and shared those. And so again, if those targets are not met, in many cases, that will mean that we need to buy more RECs. More RECs means more money. And by the way, this is not trivial. This is again by memory, but I believe the cost of RECs in 2030 is roughly double the millage revenue that we're going to get from the climate millage, double. So that means essentially everything that we go from the climate millage would have to go to RECs, and if not more. And so that's something we need to think about. The two opportunities. One is relative to storage. I didn't see any reference to storage associated with electric vehicles. And then electric vehicle capability of vehicle, it's called sometimes to home, sometimes to building, sometimes to grid. For example, all General Motors vehicles will have vehicle to building or vehicle to home capability by 2026. And generally, the storage that is on wheels is 4 to 5 times that would be the typical storage installed in a home. And so by incentivizing EVs, we have a dual benefit. I mean, we have a lot more than dual benefits. You get certainly better transportation in terms of emissions perspective. You get more storage, and then of course you get a lot of performance benefits, particularly as costs drop. So I think there's an opportunity there. I think there's another opportunity, and that is with solar cost. I noted that by 2030, the marginal cost that you showed drops dramatically. And that shows that, of course, solar costs are decreasing significantly. But if any of you have been paying attention to what Rewiring America, and in particular Saul Griffith, is saying, he constantly points out that solar in Australia costs $1 per watt. Here, I'm talking $2.60 or so, I think, is what we were estimating in the report. The hardware is the same, from the panels to the inverters to everything else, it's all soft costs. So why in the hell wouldn't we do everything we possibly can to drive solar costs down to that $1, especially if we have an SEU and we have a lot of that in our control? That means we could deploy solar at a much lower cost and likely much faster, and we probably wouldn't care whether a panel or two is in a shaded area or not. We would just deploy it like mad. So I think there's two really significant opportunities. The other thing is that there is a focus in the report, again, as there should be. This is not an opportunity or a risk, but it's just calling out to everybody's attention that the report focuses on the year 2030, except for the SEU. But we have to realize that everything doesn't end in 2030. And as I mentioned earlier, if we're going to be buying RECs in 2030, and the cost of those, and the amount of the RECs and the cost of those RECs, therefore, are going to go up based on the fact that there are more, those are going to continue into 2031, 2032, et cetera. Granted, over time, those will decrease in time. But what we're essentially have to recognize is that when we talk about a cost up to 2030 or in 2030, it doesn't end in 2030. And I think everybody needs to be cognizant of that. And then the last comment that I wanted to make is just anecdotal, and it goes back to Ken Garber's comments. I really agree that one of the things that we all have to think about with the phase 2, but also the risks associated with the phase 2, is this valuation issue. And I know that NextGen was involved in consulting with Decorah, Iowa's effort to municipalize. My son lives in Decorah, Iowa, and one of the big issues in the defeat of the municipalization effort there was this difference in evaluation. And I don't remember the numbers in Decorah, but the ratio was like 1 to 7. And the utility spent a ton of money saying the number from Decorah is BS. Our number is the right number. They sowed a lot of uncertainty in the community, and that is what sunk the effort. And you can bet, even with a great phase 2, that DTE will do the same thing here, and that will make it really, really difficult to overcome. Whether or not the phase 2 numbers are really definitive or not, as Missy and others pointed out, this is going to be something that we're going to have to contend with, and it's something we need to think about seriously. So thank you for obliging me to comment for several minutes there. I hope I didn't take time away from you else. I wanted to wait till others had a chance, but those were my key points, and there's others that are embedded in the report that I submitted. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Okay, if we respond on a few of those. Scott, do you want to comment on the valuation issue?
Gabe, that's up to you. I don't know. You got a couple of things.
Yeah, if maybe you can respond quickly, very briefly, and then
Yeah.
I just have one or two quick questions, and then maybe we'll wrap up.
Okay.
I don't really have any specific comments. I mean, yeah, we were involved in Decorah. That was, there was a lot of opposition from the incumbent utility there, and they did market and advertise, and they also, in my opinion, misled. So that, and whether or not that's going to happen here is anybody's guess. But.
Yeah, I'd say we would put that possibility in that issue of what are the legal standards that will apply, which we definitely view as uncertain and contested and not going to be resolved until somebody actually goes through the process. So I will leave most of the comments that you made to follow up later, but I want to talk just a little bit about EVs as storage. We're certainly cognizant of that and actually do a fair amount of work on it. But that doesn't produce energy. In fact, consumes a little bit. Its value is as a so-called capacity or reliability resource. Ann Arbor has no obligations for that unless you create a municipal utility. DTE bears all of the responsibility for what we call resource adequacy, unless you create a municipal electric utility. And in our modeling of what would be happening in MISO Zone 7, which is the market area that Ann Arbor falls in order to create the alternative prices that were used in the MEU study and to some extent in our other analyses, we were certainly modeling with storage that could include use of electric vehicles as storage. So completely agree with you in principle, just didn't view it as kind of on point for this particular study for those reasons.
I had one question or a couple of questions I just wanted to ask. To what extent does, and first of all, thank you very much. I mean, the presentation was great. It was very clear, and I appreciate the clarity that you put into sort of laying everything out and the responses to the questions as well and the time that you've taken. To what extent do the three different scenarios create any sort of path dependence for one or more of them around the choices that the city might take around each of those scenarios, in the sense that one of those scenarios might lock us into a set of choices that we might not be able to then sort of take a different path or vice versa. And it need not be extensive, but if you could just briefly comment on that.
And I assume by scenarios you mean like DTE or the SEU or
by DTE versus the DTE plus SEU versus the municipal.
Yeah. So for those resources that the city would pursue, let's say a virtual PPA, you can anticipate that you might want to have a municipal utility and write into the contract by way of your RFP and so on, that in the event Ann Arbor creates a municipal utility, you have the right to move that contract over to the utility and maybe even change its terms a little bit to meet the needs of that. So for the resources Ann Arbor would obtain in order to meet the 100% renewables in a DTE-based scenario with or without the SEU, that's what you would have to do in order to transition. There are some options that you could pursue if you are with DTE, and the VGP, the voluntary green pricing, is a great example of that. That would not survive the transition very well. You'd have an agreement of some kind with DTE to use renewables that they provide through voluntary green pricing, and then no one being a DTE customer, and it just doesn't hand off very well. Beyond that, the approach that we recommended of sort of topping off with national renewable energy credits while you're in a DTE scenario, and then building up your other options beneath that, reducing your need for simple renewable energy credits and investing in other things, I think takes care of most of the interconnections or dependencies, path dependencies between the approaches. There are many important nuances to think through, and let me just leave you with this one. Suppose you create a sustainable energy utility. You've got a bunch of people out there who have now a tariff they're receiving renewables from the sustainable energy utility, and then they're interacting with DTE for the rest of their power. Now you create a municipal utility. Do you continue to honor those arrangements, or do you just treat those rooftop solar resources as a part of the MEU's portfolio and charge whatever the MEU tariff is to those customers? You just have to think through, those kinds of things with some care and nuance as you enter into them if you want the option at a later date to switch to an MEU. It isn't all straightforward. So.
Thank you. I think I'll follow up with my last question, just to the staff and to share that with you as well. But I think maybe we'll close off this conversation and for now, and thank you all for sharing all this with us. This has been great, and really appreciate the time you all took to spend time with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I am just pulling up the agenda. I believe next on our agenda this evening, we have the work group formation in response to an agenda item from last meeting. Sorry, 1 second. Basically, the concept was that we were discussing a work group investigating topics surrounding gas buildings and the transition to electrification. And we wanted to introduce the topic of forming a work group to further study this option. Basically, the idea is the vote would be creating a group that would be investigating carrot and stick approaches around reducing the role of fossil gas in buildings and how affordability and electrification interact with each other. And we want to take a moment to explore this and tease this out a little bit in terms of discussion. Joe, maybe you could give me a sense of what we might need to do to take this up.
Yeah, I think just in terms of process, we would need to just vote to open discussion, talk a little bit about it, and then at the end vote whether we want to create said work group. The way that things are in the bylaws is basically we would, if that vote were to pass, create the work group. Folks would, we wouldn't determine within the meeting who's going to be part of that work group, but folks who are interested can pass on that information to Chair McKenna. Chair McKenna would appoint members, which would then be approved by the commission at the next meeting. So for today's purposes, it would again be, we'd need someone to make a motion to open discussion, a second, vote to open discussion, discuss as much as we need, and then vote whether we want to create said work group. Also worth noting, with the work group, there'll be an assigned staff person, not myself, but someone who will just be checking in, say, bi-weekly or so, just to provide input from city, so it's not just kind of feeling like you're out on your own trying to figure everything out on that end, as well as just sticking with what's been happening at the city and being able to provide guidance where needed. So any questions on procedure? If not, feel free to jump in, or I should say feel free if someone is interested to first.
Is there a motion to open discussion?
Move to open the discussion.
A second.
There's a second. The motion is approved. Oh, do we have to vote on the motion, right?
Yeah, just vote by the group.
All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Raise your hand, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The motion is approved. For my part, I will just kick this off and just say that one of the ways that we had discussed talking about the sort of scope of the work group would be to explore the different options for carrots and sticks as sort of one part of that work group and what they would undertake. And the other part of that also looking at to what extent is there analysis of the perceived or apparent or real trade-off between affordability and electrification. And so those sort of two twin goals would be were what we had sort of some of the topics that we had initially discussed as the sort of scope for what the work group would undertake. I believe that the idea is that the work group could potentially be set out to report back at the January meeting, which would be a pretty aggressive timeline in terms of doing some of that work, although it could be extended if they needed more time. And then as Joe said, that there would be and that the group could also provide updates at the commission meetings as well in terms of where they're at and how they are operating. Other questions, clarifications, or comments? Commissioner Murski?
So I thought I'd weigh in on this. Again, I hope others do so. I'd like to provide at least context from my perspective. And I invite Joe or anybody else to weigh in on this. But first of all, Council approved a resolution in June asking the city administrator to issue a progress report by the end of the year, December 31st, on measures that the city, on recommended measures the city could take to incentivize all electric construction. Joe could send it out, but it's relatively brief resolution. There's 2 resolve clauses, but that's the gist of it. So this is already being worked on by city staff. Secondly, as I mentioned in our last meeting when we discussed this, a local environmental group of which I'm a member called the Wolfpack has a climate action team. We spent several months putting together a list of 28 possible such measures. Those have been reviewed with Councilmember Briggs, Councilmember Dish, who serves on Planning Commission, as well as the mayor. The mayor had turned around and forwarded those to key members of city staff, including Missy. That happened in July. So those things have been going on. I'm going to tell you honestly how I feel about this. I support the resolution. I would vote for it, understanding that there's a lot of question marks. My understanding from many data points is that City Council is not inclined to impose sticks. I still think it's appropriate for the Energy Commission to weigh in if we think that a stick like the proposed carbon fee makes sense. But what I just want to share with everyone, and this is something that I think about all the time when I take on a task, is what is going to be the return on my time invested? And if we form a working group and Council has already passed a resolution, there's already measures that have been recommended and provided to city decision makers as well as city administrators. If Council is not inclined, and somebody can speak up if they feel differently, but not inclined to impose sticks, and this is clearly a stick, I just want all of us to think as we decide on this, both personally and collectively, what is going to be the return on our time invested, and maybe whether or not we should act on this now, or whether we do a formal working group potentially after having heard from the city administrator by the end of the year. So I just offer that up for everyone's consideration, as well as for anybody else to weigh in with their understanding of what context is and what the situation might be and what the return might be on our time invested.
Other comments and questions? Discussion. Oh,
I was just gonna say, unfortunately, we don't have our two council members to weigh in. That would, their perspective, I think, would be really helpful because
Yeah.
they would answer some of my
yeah.
I'll say concerns or estimates of their view of the situation. But go ahead, Carlene.
Yeah, Carlene.
Well,
Commissioner
my question, yes, thank you very much. And Commissioner Mirsky, thank you so much for all the work that you've done. You've already put into this and giving us and giving the city like a lot of, doing a lot of the work that would otherwise possibly not be done, or, giving us a little bit of a head start. So my question is, what would be the level of interaction that this working group could have with the members of staff, or, getting access to the information that has already been gathered, to possibly fill in gaps, or, add more ideas. So yeah, like what kind of access would this group have to what's already been done?
Yeah, to be clear, from my understanding, it would be, roughly a bi-weekly meeting with a member of staff who is involved in that work. It wouldn't necessarily be like giving stacks of all the files that, they're working on, things like that. But, it'd be conversations around, what has been worked on, what hasn't been. As the group goes, we've been looking into these things. Is that, you'd have a sense of like what has been looked into. It's not necessarily a full report or anything of that, 'cause there is not a full report until that is, put out at such a time. So, it would be in that kind of level where it'd be more kind of those informal meetings, discussions, and then working through kind of collaboratively from there. But it would, the work streams would mix and match as determined kind of with the staff member of what's appropriate. I don't have a great answer outside of that, just because I'm not directly involved in that process at the moment.
I'd like to follow up just based on, okay, thank you. So considering what we just, what we just learned from Commissioner Mirsky, the light that he shed on the work that has been done, then what do you think would be the value that such a working group would offer then, Joe?
And it purely my personal opinion of, the more eyes you have on something, the more likely you are to kind of catch things. That would kind of be that benefit. But again, like I said, there is a lot of work being done. I mean, work outside of just Office of Sustainability, so areas that I don't have oversight over. So I don't know everything that's being done there, but I know there's a lot of work that is being done by a lot of, talented people who this is their, full-time job that they are doing a lot on. So to me, it would just be kind of that additional set of eyes would be the benefit from that angle. But in terms of like, is the work getting done or not getting done, it wouldn't necessarily be. Without this working group, the work would not be getting done, kind of a deal. If that makes sense.
Okay. I think so. Thank you very much.
One thing I might add, just in terms of the timing, is that in between this meeting and the next week and next commission meeting, names of those who are interested would potentially be submitted to Joe to share with the chair, at which point then there would be, I believe, an appointment made by the chair and the commission would vote on it. That vote might happen in November or December, at which point those other recommendations might be available, I would imagine, if I'm understanding the sort of sequence of the process right. Joe. At which point it might be within the scope of the working group to then look at what has been recommended and sort of add to that, if I'm understanding how that might play out. Commissioner Mursky? Or sorry, Joe, sorry if you wanted to respond.
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. 3 points quickly. First of all, I wanted to be clear on my characterization of the resolution. The resolution calls for quote unquote a progress report. And I don't know what that means or what it could mean. I just want to point out that it doesn't ask for a final report by the end of the year. It asks for a progress report. The report could be a final report. The report could be that we evaluated 28 measures plus 5 of our own, and we boiled those down to 10, and we need another 6 months to evaluate those. I have no idea. I assume council's expectation is that the report will be pretty specific by the end of the year, but that's not guaranteed based on the language of the resolution. Second, I think the group could have 2 different tasks or charges. One is to look at the topic more generally. I don't know that that really makes a whole lot of sense. The other charge is the charge specific to the resolution that we considered at our last meeting, which addresses specifically a carbon fee. And there were a number of questions and concerns related to that. For example, how do you estimate what the carbon emissions are going to be of a new building, and how much time does that take, and what is the burden on developers and things like that. So there were a whole bunch of questions specific to the resolution, and the working group could focus exclusively on those concerns and then address that relative to the resolution, and we could vote on the resolution. I'll just emphasize again, I don't know how well received that resolution is going to be considered by council to begin with. So I just want to point out those 3 things.
Thank you. So I guess, shall we close discussion on this and sort of move, is there a motion to move towards a vote for this?
Well, you might want to ask if there's anyone that's here that's interested in serving on it. And if there's no one that's interested, then we can vote yes, we want to form the working group, but in effect, the answer is no if no one volunteers. That's another option that I leave up to you, Gabe.
Yeah, I'll give whatever a number of points here that I'll stumble through as we go. But yeah, the first is one. Yeah, we can move to voting on it. We can also vote to, considering we've had some discussion on that, there'll be more information coming later. We could also, table until there is that information if that's the route we want to go. Like if we want it to be, more specific around what those findings are, we could postpone until that, that information is available, and then that is what the group is focusing on. I had more that I was going to say, but I have forgotten what that was. Forgive me. I had about 10 hours of travel today, so I'm a little scrambled. Apologies on that. If I had some other point, as to what Commissioner Mursky was saying, we can, if people were to be appointed, regardless, like there's no formal, like you have to let me know through this specific manner or through this time. So it's more than fine for people like, yeah, I'm generally interested. We can get that now. And then people could feel free to, sit back and think like, oh yeah, no, I would actually be interested in that. They can let us know later. Like all that would be, or the cutoff would be whenever we form the actual group, kind of a thing. So that would be a fine thing to happen here. Because again, if no one's interested at this point, maybe it's not, worth at that point in time, but acknowledging that like people could be, on the spot, not sure at this moment of their interest. So those are the 2 things I wanted to point out.
Commissioner Calvin Garcia, did you have a question?
Joe addressed what I was going to possibly suggest was like, we can just move to form the group and let the next couple weeks pass and have folks think about it, because we have until our next meeting to formally appoint the group members. That was what I was going to, and Joe pretty much covered it. Thank you.
So I think procedurally we could first vote, or if someone would want to move to vote on the group itself, we could do so. We could also have someone propose to table it until such a point in time that whatever comes out is available. We can also two-step approach that, where if we vote to or move to vote on it, that vote fails, at that point table it. I think those are the three options before us at this time, unless others have other thoughts on that.
Thank you, Joe. Commissioner Calvin Garcia.
I have one question. That's all I have, and it is, what would the name of the group be?
I do not have a name.
Yeah,
Currently
I just,
on the currently
yeah.
on the agenda, it's the work group investigating topics surrounding gas and buildings and the transition to electrification, just as listed in the agenda. But that perhaps could be left. Yeah.
I would be very good with that. And I would be happy to propose a motion if that's something that you're open to at this point, Chair.
Yes. Are there any motions at this point to take a vote on the formation of the working group, or otherwise?
I second the motion.
And just to make sure for note keeping, this is to formalize or to create the group, right, at this point in time.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay.
If I could chime in real quickly, we can vote to form the group and do as Carlene said, and then digest all this, and we may get no volunteers, or we may during that digestive period decide that we want to wait and form the group in January after we see the progress group. It just leaves the door open, and I think there's a lot of advantages to that.
That's my understanding as well. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Okay. All those in favor of forming the group, the work group investigating topics surrounding gas and buildings and transition to electrification, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you.
Yeah, and with that, just again, as mentioned, at any point, if anyone is interested, feel free to send in to myself or Chair McKenna or Vice Chair Harp, or all three of us, letting us know of your interest. And yeah, if anyone has any questions about what this might entail, what this might look like, feel free to reach out to any of us at any time, and we can help talk through that. So if folks just want to let us know, ideally, I don't know, but before the next meeting for sure, but say, a week and a half before the next meeting, that would be appreciated.
Joe, can you note that in the minutes so we have a reminder?
You bet.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. The energy report, news from the Energy Office and Commissioners.
I will again, for the second time now, ask for forgiveness. I've been out pretty much the past 2 weeks. Physically got home at about 5 o'clock tonight. So I do not currently have any updates at this time. Apologies.
No worries. Okay, report from the Environmental Commission.
Thank you. Three things. The last meeting, we had a presentation on what was called Path to Citywide Returnables, but it really focuses on a concept for takeout food returnables. There is a pilot going on right now with about 4 restaurants. I think we probably talked about it in this meeting. It's a first step towards, or not a first step, but one step towards the circular economy. And that's an interesting presentation. So if you're interested on the subject, look at the slides, or better yet, watch that portion of the meeting. The other thing that we did was had a final review of our bylaws. There's a few dangling things that we're going to finalize for the next meeting, but that's basically done. And just a hint that we're supposed to do that, I think, also annually. And then talking about bylaws, I just wanted to bring up one point so I don't have to do it later. And that is, at the end of May, we had 4 openings on the commission. I think we filled 2 of those. 4.5 months have passed, and I would just encourage the chair, the co-chair, staff, and council members to fill those open positions soon. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Mirsky. Okay, moving on to our second opportunity for public input. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
All right, caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Yeah, Ken Garber again. Yeah, good discussions this meeting. I won't keep you. I just want to give you a little historical perspective. Back in January 2020, I submitted a proposed building code amendment that would have banned gas connections in all new construction to the Energy Commission. And the then chair, Shoshana Lenski, very graciously accepted it and assigned it to the Subcommittee on Housing and the Built Environment. That resolution never went anywhere for various reasons, and that subcommittee was dissolved. So I feel a sense of deja vu with this working group forming today, almost 4 years later. Never in my wildest imagination 4 years ago would I have imagined that over this entire span of time, we would have made 0 progress on this issue. And as Commissioner Mirsky alluded to earlier, since then, the city has approved over 2 million square feet of new construction that will be heated with natural gas. And these projects continue to go through. I say all this to give you just a little bit of perspective and maybe share some of my frustration over the complete inability to come to grips with this, and hopefully impart a sense of urgency to you, the Energy Commission, to finally do something or move forward in a constructive way, whether it's with the carbon impact fee on new construction that you first considered last month, or some other approach. Doesn't matter to me. I just feel that this issue has to be addressed, and and urgently and quickly. So, not many of you were around 4 years ago, maybe Commissioner Colvin Garcia and Commissioner Mirsky, and that's probably it. But just so the rest of you know, this has been around for a long time, and it needs to be fixed. So thank you for all your work on the commission. I'm a real fan of the body and of your work, and thanks for, as always, considering my comments. Have a good night.
Thank you. Caller ending in 462.
Thank you. I'm Joshua Jacobson, 1755 South Franklin Court. Thanks to the commission for hearing my comment today. I'll try and keep it short. I was unable to join for the first portion, so I apologize if I touch on anything that's already been covered. But I'd like to encourage the commission to pass a resolution in support of taking the next step on municipalization. Municipalization is a sound investment that pays for itself over time. And I think that with a phase 2 feasibility study, we can more directly analyze the cost-benefit analysis and the impact on our community. As the saying goes, the best time to form a municipal utility was 131 years ago. The second best time is now. So thank you again.
Thank you. Caller ending in 483.
Good evening. My name is Don Lee. I'm the Executive Director of Ann Arbor for Public Power. I want to thank you all for your consideration and the feasibility study and your careful work on this. I have a couple concerns. I'm sorry I wasn't able to express these earlier. Behind the meter solar PV or customer solar wasn't modeled in the MEU study. And on day one of municipalization, Ann Arbor would set the rules for customer-owned solar. And I would add to Commissioner Mirsky's point, storage, which is critically important to resilience. And also there's this ongoing insistence that community solar is illegal in Michigan, even though both municipal utilities in Lansing and Traverse City have community solar programs. I can only assume that this is based on another assumption from the study that municipalization cannot be achieved by 2030. So these are a couple of omissions and assumptions that appear to be a product of the limited parameters of the study rather than a reflection of the most meaningful and just path forward to a renewable energy future. I'm concerned that these assumptions and omissions will carry over into the phase 2 work, and I'd like the Energy Committee to be cognizant of the limitations of these parameters moving forward to ensure that a phase 2 study explores municipalization on its merits without arbitrary parameters. That's all I have, and I just want to thank you for your ongoing work with this. And as you may have figured out, I'm very supportive of moving forward with the phase 2 study.
Thank you. No further callers.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Items next on the agenda is items for the next agenda, and welcome to share any now or email them in advance of the next agenda, hopefully a couple weeks before, so that we can have a chance to sort of get those on. Okay, hearing no additional items at the moment, please feel free to follow up if you do. I will call this meeting adjourned at 8:56 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for your time tonight.
Thanks, Gabe. Well done.
Thanks all. Yes, and thanks, Vice Chair Harp, for filling in so well tonight.